Ava's scream cut through the cold morning like a razor through silence. Her coffee mug shattered on the floor, ceramic shards skittering across linoleum like fleeing soldiers. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, the letter trembling in her hand. The words on the page blurred, but she didn't need to read them again. "Your position has been terminated, effective immediately." She sank to the floor in her worn cardigan, breath shallow, eyes locked on the signature. Elliot Braham, Executive Director. That name pierced her like an arrow. She hadn't seen it in years, her birth surname. The name of the father she never knew. Her hands shook. Could it be a coincidence? Her pulse roared in her ears. Memories, foster homes, unanswered questions, her mother's silence, flooded back. Her whole life she'd wondered where she came from. Now the truth might have just fired her. The door behind her creaked as her neighbor Lena called out, "Ava, you okay?" But Ava was already gone, lost in a tidal wave of realization, betrayal, and a name that felt like both a beginning and an end. The apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock, each second a thud in Ava's chest. She hadn't moved. Her fingers still clenched the letter like a lifeline. Lena stepped in, her voice hushed. "Ava, what happened?" Ava didn't look up. "He fired me," she said, her voice cracked as if speaking scraped her throat raw. Lena crouched beside her, glancing at the paper. "Elliot Brahman? Is that?" Ava slowly nodded, her eyes still on the signature. "That's my birth name. I never knew who he was. Until now." Lena froze. A flicker of panic crossed her face, but only for a moment. That's impossible. Maybe it's a coincidence." Ava finally looked at her. "You don't believe that, and neither do I." The room felt colder now, like the truth had sucked the warmth from the walls. The ting continued, louder than before. A crack had formed, and the silence of Ava's life had finally broken. Ava rose unsteadily, brushing shards away from her jeans. "I need answers." Her voice, though barely above a whisper, was solid. Lena opened her mouth, then closed it. Ava didn't wait. She stepped over the mess, grabbed her phone, and began to search. Elliot Braham, Executive Director. The results lit the screen. Photos, interviews, charity board appointments. Her father, alive and powerful. She tapped a link. Founder of Braham Foundation for Civic Justice. "He's everywhere," Ava muttered. Lena remained quiet. "You knew, didn't you?" Ava asked, not looking away from the screen. "I thought it wasn't my place," Lena said. Ava turned, her stare sharp. "You live 2 doors down. You've known me for 10 years. That makes it your place." Lena looked down, guilt burning through her mask of calm. And Ava? She wasn't just angry. She was electrified. For the first time, the silence of her past had a name, and she was going to chase it. By mid-morning, Ava was dressed in a simple navy coat, standing outside her building. The city moved indifferently around her. Horns blared, dogs barked, lives moved on. But hers had just split in 2. She stared down the street, wondering how many times she'd passed by pieces of her past without knowing. Behind her, Lena hesitated at the door. "Where are you going?" Ava didn't answer. Her phone buzzed in her coat. Another news article about Elliot. She pulled it out and read silently. Political ties. Government contracts. Ike. Hidden settlements. Ava's jaw tensed. "He's not just some executive," she muttered. "He's something else." Lena's voice was almost inaudible. "Be careful, Ava. Some stories hurt more when they're true." Ava looked over her shoulder, wind lifting her hair. "I'm done being afraid of the truth," she said. Then she walked down the steps, each one a step into the fire. Ava sat at a bus stop across from the Braham Foundation's downtown office. The building towered above the sidewalk. Glass, steel, arrogance. She stared at the revolving doors. She didn't know what she would do if she walked inside. But she wasn't here to act. She was here to see. Her eyes followed a group of executives exiting, laughing. One of them, Tall, olive skin, strong jawline, looked eerily familiar. She leaned forward. Something in his gait, his smirk. Her blood turned to ice. "That's him," she whispered. "Elliot? No. Too young." This man looked her age. Could it be her brother? She watched him get into a black SUV. Her heart pounded as questions screamed through her mind. Why did he fire me? Did he know who I was? The puzzle pieces weren't just scattered, they were jagged. And someone had started fitting them together before she even knew there was a puzzle. Ava sat alone in her tiny living room, a stack of old files and faded photographs spread across the coffee table. Dust particles drifted in the sunlight slanting through the blinds. She traced her fingers over a worn photo. Her mother, smiling faintly, holding baby Ava in front of a community clinic. "You never told me anything," Ava whispered to the photo. "Why?" The silence didn't answer. Older labeled medical intake, foster system caught her eye. As she flipped through it, a familiar name popped out. Elliot Braham, emergency contact, denied. Ava's breath hitched. Her mother had tried to list him. Someone had rejected the connection. Her hands trembled. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew I existed." It wasn't just that her past was unknown. It had been actively erased. She stood slowly, fire in her eyes now, and muttered, "He walked away from me. But I'm not going away." Ava visited the Southridge Community Clinic, a place that had faded into the background of her childhood. The receptionist, an older woman with tight curls and sharp eyes, gave her a polite but puzzled smile. "I was treated here as a child," Ava explained. "So was my mother, Maya Khatri." The name stirred something. The receptionist leaned back. "That was years ago. I remember her. Quiet. Always worried." Ava nodded slowly. "Did she ever mention a man? Elliot Brand?" The woman frowned. "I remember her arguing with a man once. He wore a suit. Didn't seem like he belonged here. She cried afterward. That's all I recall." Ava's chest tightened. Even in fragments, the truth clawed its way back. She left the clinic with more questions than answers, but the shadows had names now, and voices, too. She just had to follow them. Ava stood in front of an old apartment building, Unit 3BID. Her mother's last listed address before she vanished from Ava's records. The building reeked of history and disrepair. She rang the bell. An old man answered, cigarette dangling from his lip, eyebrows lifted. "Maya? That name's from another life." He invited her in. The apartment was stale with dust and faded wallpaper. She rented this place, early 90s, kept to herself, had a baby, sweet girl. But one day, she left, just like that. Ava's voice caught. "Did she say why?" He shook his head. "Just said something about danger. Said she was done being a secret." Ava's pulse pounded. A secret. A threat. A disappearance. And now, Ava knew. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She'd been silenced. Erased. And Ava had inherited the fight she'd left behind. That night, Ava sat at her desk, laptop open, digging through court documents and nonprofit databases. She found a familiar name. Elliot Braham, connected to dozens of contracts, real estate deals, and sealed court filings. Her screen glowed with a trail of power and protection. Then another name surfaced. Graham Mercer. A former partner. Ava clicked. His face filled the screen. Familiar. Kyle. Her heartbeat surged. It was the man she saw entering the SUV, the one who had fired her. Not Elliot. Graham Mercer, Tuan. Her brother. She blinked, stunned. The connection was undeniable. Same eyes. Same chin. She leaned back, reeling. "You're not just some executive," she whispered. "You're him, and you knew who I was." The walls felt tighter. She wasn't chasing shadows anymore. She was inside them. Ava's apartment felt heavier than ever. The walls, once comfort, now closed in with secrets. Lena knocked on the door, hesitant. Ava opened it, her face unreadable. "I know who he is," Ava said. "Not Elliot. The man who fired me. Graham Mercer." Lena froze. Ava continued, "He is my brother." Lena's mouth opened, then closed. "Ava, I knew you'd find out eventually." Ava's eyes narrowed. "How long have you known?" Lena lowered her gaze. "Years. I worked with your mother before she passed. She made me promise. And never to tell you. Said you'd be safer not knowing." Ava's voice cracked. "She trusted you with the truth. And you kept it from me." Lena stepped forward. "Whoa. She was trying to protect you." Ava's silence was louder than any scream. She turned away and whispered, "The truth doesn't need protection. It needs to be free." The door shut quietly, but the rupture echoed. The library's silence wrapped around Ava like armor. Seated beneath a sunbeam that cut across shelves of public records, she scoured old newspaper archives, city court logs, and non-profit disclosures. Her fingers danced from page to page until they paused on an article dated 15 years ago. Brand Foundation linked to cover-up in city housing scandal. Elliot's name appeared 3 times. And in smaller print, legal representative, Graham Mercer. Ava's eyes widened. They weren't just family. They were business partners, entrenched in the very corruption her mother tried to escape. The betrayal hit harder now. This wasn't just a story of abandonment. It was a story of exploitation, silencing, and complicity. Ava exhaled slowly, her breath trembling. "They built empires on people like her," she whispered. "On people like me." Rage didn't roar. It simmered. She stood, closed the file, and walked out, not as a daughter or victim, but as a reckoning waiting to happen. Outside the library, Ava paced under the weight of realization. She called an old contact, Raymond, a retired journalist who once investigated the Braham Foundation. "Ava," he answered, voice rasped with age. "Haven't heard that name in years. You knew my mother," Ava said. "Maya Khatri." Silence. Then, she was brave. She tried to speak. They shut her down. Ava's grip tightened on the phone. "Did she name them?" Raymond sighed. "Elliot, yes. And his son. The kid was just starting out then, but already sharp, cold. Maya told me she had proof, but then she disappeared. I always wondered." Ava's throat clenched. Proof. Full. Silenced. Her mother hadn't been weak, she'd been hunted. Raymond paused. "If you're calling now, you're chasing something dangerous." Ava stared down a city street full of noise and life. "I'm not chasing," she said. "I'm finishing what she started." Later that evening, Ava sat in Lena's apartment, not out of forgiveness, but necessity. "You said you worked with my mother," Ava said. Lena nodded, cautious. "We volunteered at a women's shelter. Your mother, she was afraid, but she had fire in her. She collected records, photos, receipts, names. She said if anything happened to her, someone had to know." Ava leaned forward. "Do you have them?" Lena hesitated. Then she rose and returned with a rusted tin box. Inside, old Polaroids, handwritten notes, a USB drive. Ava's hands shook. The first photo was Elliot shaking hands with a police chief. Another, a young Graham, at a charity gala. The notes mentioned payoffs, threats, dates. A hidden narrative. "She trusted you with this," Ava said quietly. Lena nodded. "And now I'm trusting you." Ava's heart raced. The silence had teeth, but now, Ava had the bite. Ava stayed up all night cross-referencing the files with public reports. The deeper she dug, the uglier it got. Embezzlement, silenced whistleblowers, closed-door deals. And at the center, Elliot and Graham. The USB revealed scanned documents, Original complaints signed by her mother. The files hadn't just been buried. They'd been removed by someone on the inside. She sat frozen for a moment. Her mother had known she was in danger. She hadn't disappeared, she'd been forced out. Ava looked around her dim apartment, papers covering every surface, a storm of truth finally breaking through. She whispered, "You tried to erase us, but I remember now." With new resolve, she began assembling a timeline, names, dates, evidence. She wasn't a teacher or a daughter anymore. She was the storm her mother didn't survive to become. At dawn, Ava printed everything. Her wall now held a map of the scandal, red string connecting names, photos, transactions. She pinned the last photo, her mother holding baby Ava, standing outside the Foundation's original building. "You were never just collateral," Ava said to the photo. "You were the threat." Her phone buzzed. An anonymous tip texted to her number. "Stop digging." She stared at it, calm. Not fear, confirmation. She walked to the window, watching the sun rise over a city built on forgotten stories. She wasn't done. Not even close. She snapped a photo of the board, then sent it to Raymond with one line. "It's time." Then, grabbing her coat, she turned to face the door. The silence that shaped her life had finally met its match. And its name was Ava Khatri. Ava stood in the lobby of a downtown legal aid center, her heart pounding with each passing second. She had requested to meet a retired caseworker, Marian Delgado, who had once handled her foster placement. The woman approached slowly, her cane tapping softly. "You look just like her," Marian said gently. "Maya." Ava swallowed. "Did my mother ever tell you who my father was?" Marian hesitated, then nodded. "She told me everything. She begged us to document it, but every time we filed something, it disappeared." Ava frowned. "Disappeared?" Marian leaned in. "We were silenced, but I kept a copy." From her bag she pulled a worn envelope, edges curled with age. Inside, hospital forms, letters, and a DNA test, never submitted. "I knew this day would come," Marian said softly. Ava clutched the papers like a lifeline. It wasn't just them. The system helped bury her. And now, Ava had proof it was never an accident. Back at her apartment, Ava sat at the table staring at the documents. Among them, a paternity letter naming Elliot Bram as her biological father. But another document caught her attention. A signed affidavit from Lena, dated years earlier. Her hands froze. "No," she whispered. Lena had sworn to protect Ava from her biological family if Maya disappeared. She didn't just know, Ava muttered. She was part of it. The betrayal bloomed like poison in her chest. Lena hadn't just hidden the truth, she'd promised to keep Ava in the dark. Ava stood abruptly, knocking over a chair. Her life had been carefully kept in a shadow, and Lena had helped build it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was control. And Ava was done being handled. Ava stormed down the hall and pounded on Lena's door. Lena opened it slowly, her eyes tired. "You knew," Ava said. "Not just about Elliot. About everything. You signed an affidavit." Lena looked stunned but didn't deny it. "Your mother begged me," she said. She was terrified of what they'd do if they knew you were alive. If Graham found out. Ava's voice trembled. "So you locked me in silence. You let me grow up thinking I was abandoned." Lena's eyes filled. "I didn't know how to keep you safe without lying." Ava stepped back, a storm building. "You chose silence over truth, and that's the same choice they made." Lena reached for her, but Ava pulled away. "I needed family. You gave me fear." Then she walked away, because some betrayals don't need screaming. Just distance. Ava sat in her car outside the Braham Foundation building once again, the folder of proof on the passenger seat. She watched people pass through the revolving door like nothing was wrong. Her eyes locked on a security guard, familiar. She checked the old photos Marian had given her. The man had once been listed in a housing scam investigation, and now worked security for the foundation. It wasn't just nepotism, It was a network, she whispered. They've been protecting each other for decades. Ava's phone buzzed again. Stop now, or be stopped. This time, she didn't flinch. She snapped a photo of the building. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about exposure. Her family had power. But she had the truth. And truth, when lit right, is blinding. Night fell as Ava returned to her apartment, mind spinning. She opened her laptop, uploaded the entire folder, photos, files, the DNA results, and began drafting an anonymous submission to a major news outlet. Her finger hovered above the send button. Then, a knock at the door. She opened it to find Lena standing there, holding something wrapped in cloth. This is the last thing Maya gave me, she said quietly. She said if you ever found the truth you'd need this. Inside the bundle, a journal. Her mother's. Pages filled with heartbreak, hope, warnings, and a final entry. If she finds this, tell her I never left. I was taken. But she is stronger than I ever was. Ava's hands shook. Her mother's voice, finally unburied. She turned back to her screen and hit send. The truth was no longer hers to carry alone. The next morning, Ava's story broke. Headlines exploded online. Whistleblower reveals Braham family ties to decades-long corruption scandal. She watched the coverage unfold from a cafe window, fingers gripping a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. The air vibrated with tension. People around her murmured, some reading the same headlines on their phones. Her phone buzzed. Raymond. It's everywhere, he said. They can't bury it now. Ava barely nodded. Then, I did it right. Across the street, a sleek black car idled too long. Her breath caught. Was she being watched? Or was fear just louder now that the silence was gone? She whispered, I brought the truth into the light. But exposing them wasn't enough. She still hadn't faced them. Not the man who erased her, not the brother who unknowingly pulled the trigger. That confrontation was coming. And she would walk straight into it. Ava arrived at the Braham Foundation, uninvited. The receptionist blinked in surprise. Do you have an appointment? Ava smiled coldly. He'll want to see me. Tell Graham Mercer his sister's here. The woman paused, uncertain. Moments later, security led her to a private conference room. Graham entered, stone-faced. Ava. Her name was a weapon in his mouth. Well, you should have stayed quiet. She stood. You fired me, without knowing I was the reason your empire is cracking. He narrowed his eyes. You think this is justice? You've exposed yourself to people who don't play fair. Ava's voice sharpened. You've built your life on secrets, but you buried the wrong woman. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, I didn't know about you until recently. Ava's breath caught. And you still signed my termination. He looked away. I was told to. Ava stepped closer. By who? The silence that followed was answer enough. Graham leaned against the window, his expression cracking. Elliot knew about you. He knew from the beginning. I was a teenager when I overheard them fighting about it. I didn't know who they meant until I saw your name in the HR files. Ava stepped back, stunned. You knew. And still. I didn't know how to stop it, Graham said. My entire career, my life, is tied to his. And if I defy him, I lose everything. Ava shook her head slowly. You had a choice, you always did. And you chose power. His jaw tensed. What would you have done? Grown up with him? Become part of this mess? Ava's voice was cold steel. I would have chosen to protect my family no matter what it cost. Silence stretched between them, thick, accusatory. Finally, she turned toward the door. I'm not afraid of your father, but you should be. Ava arrived at a private event that evening, a Braham Foundation gala, the kind of place where scandals are ignored beneath chandeliers. She moved like a ghost through tailored suits and crystal glasses. On stage, Elliot Braham delivered a speech about public service and integrity. Ava felt bile rise in her throat. Then, He saw her. His voice faltered. "Ava," he said, off mic but audible. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ava stepped forward, holding the folder, copies of the documents she'd released. "Tell them who you really are," she said. Elliot's smile froze. "Don't do this here. Where else?" she asked. "You buried my mother in the dark. You built this legacy on lies. I'm dragging it into the light." Cameras flashed. Whispers turned to roars. The man who once denied her existence now stood cornered in front of the world. Outside the gala, chaos erupted. Reporters shouted. Guests fled. Elliot slipped into a waiting car, face pale, future crumbling. But Ava stood still. In her hand, her mother's journal. Beside her, Lena appeared silently, offering no words, only presence. Ava finally looked at her. "You were wrong. I didn't need protection. I needed truth." Lena nodded. "And now you have it." Sirens wailed in the distance. Maybe police, maybe more cameras. Ava felt no fear. Only clarity. "I've burned every bridge they built to keep me silent," she said. Lena gave a faint smile. "Now what?" Ava looked toward the skyline. "Now I rebuild, on my own terms." She stepped forward, alone, past limousines and flashbulbs. She wasn't their secret anymore. She was their reckoning. And the world had finally heard her voice. The fallout was immediate. News stations dissected every document. Ava leaked. Public outcry erupted. Investigations were launched. Graham issued a vague statement of cooperation. Elliot vanished from public view. Ava watched from her apartment, the television muted. Her walls were bare now. No red strings, no photos. Just silence. But this time, it didn't feel empty. Lena entered, holding a newspaper. "They're opening a criminal inquiry," she said. Ava nodded slowly. "It won't bring my mother back." Lena placed the paper down. "No, but it will stop them from hurting anyone else." Ava's fingers brushed the edge of her mother's journal on the table. She didn't die for nothing. Her voice was steady, not broken. She wasn't seeking revenge anymore. Justice wasn't a flame. It was a long, cold burn. And it had finally been lit. A week later, Ava returned to the community center where she used to teach writing workshops. Kids ran in and out of the building, laughter echoing. She walked in, head high, greeted by familiar smiles. "Ava," one of the coordinators called out. "You're really back." Ava nodded. "If you'll have me." They led her to the same classroom she'd once used, worn desks, marker-stained whiteboards. She placed her bag down gently, then turned to face the sunlight pouring through the window. This place hadn't changed. But she had. Here, she wasn't someone's secret or scandal. She was a teacher, a mentor, a survivor. She pulled out a notebook and wrote on the board, "Truth has roots." The kids filed in minutes later. Ava greeted each one with a quiet smile, her voice calm as she said, "Let's begin again." Ava visited her mother's old gravesite, a small headstone tucked beneath a willow tree, weathered but standing. She knelt slowly, her hand brushing the carved name, Maya Khatri. "I found it," she said softly. "Everything you tried to protect, everything they tried to hide." The wind stirred through the branches, gentle and constant. She set a photograph on the grass, her and her mother, one she'd found in Marion's envelope. Then her voice broke. "I wish you could see me now. I wish I could ask you how to keep going." Her fingers trembled. "But I think I already know." The breeze carried her words. This was goodbye, but not the kind that ends something. This was the goodbye that births legacy. Ava stood, lighter now. Her story had been silenced. Now it was carved into stone, voice, and memory. That evening, Ava held a community reading event at the center. Locals gathered, young, old, curious. She stood at a simple podium, reading excerpts from her mother's journal. She wrote, "Even if no one believes me, I will still speak, because silence is their weapon, And my refusal is mine. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ava's voice held no tremor. My mother wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. And so am I. The applause was quiet, but sincere. A young girl in the front row raised her hand. Are you scared they'll come after you? Ava smiled. I used to be, but truth gives you something fear can't touch. In that moment, Ava wasn't a daughter, a whistleblower, or a teacher. She was a mirror, reflecting back every woman who had been erased. And this time, the world was listening. After everyone left, Ava stood alone in the hall, folding chairs pushed aside, her journal in hand. Lena walked in quietly. You were amazing, she said. Ava turned, offering a tired smile. I was honest. Lena hesitated. Are you going to disappear now? Ava looked at the empty room around them. No, I'm going to stay. There are still stories buried in this city. People with voices they've forgotten how to use. She paused. Maybe I can help them find them again. Lena stepped forward. Then I'll help you. The two women stood there, not as allies of circumstance, but as survivors who chose truth over comfort. The overhead lights dimmed automatically, casting long shadows. Ava looked up at the ceiling and whispered, We're not finished, we're just getting started. Weeks passed. The city moved forward, but Ava walked through it, changed. She didn't blend into the noise anymore. She moved through it deliberately. As she crossed a park on her way to the community center, she passed a newsstand. The headline read, Justice Department charges filed against Braham and Mercer. Ava paused, not with satisfaction but with reflection. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The truth had done its job. A child tugged on her coat as she passed. Miss Ava, you coming today? Ava nodded, kneeling to meet his eyes. Wouldn't miss it. The boy grinned and ran ahead. Behind her, the city's skyline glinted in the sun. Ava looked back once, not at the buildings, but at what they once represented. Secrets, silence, power. Now they were just glass and stone. They didn't own her anymore. She had reclaimed her story, and she was carrying it forward. Inside the community center, Ava watched her students write. The room buzzed with quiet focus, pens scratching, thoughts blooming on paper. One girl raised her hand. Miss Ava, how do you know when your story ends? Ava thought for a long moment before answering. It doesn't. It just changes shape. The girl nodded and returned to her notebook. Ava walked between the desks, glancing at lines about dreams, family, and fear. She saw herself in these pages, not as the girl who had been silenced, but as the woman teaching others to speak. She returned to her seat, her journal open to a blank page. For the first time, she wasn't writing about loss. She was writing forward. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. The air felt warmer somehow, and the silence that once caged her now gave space for others to rise. That afternoon, Ava stood before a mural in progress, young artists painting a wall outside the center. The image, a tree with deep, sprawling roots and branches reaching into sky-blue space. At the base, a figure holding a journal. It's you, one of the teens said, brushing paint along a branch. Ava laughed lightly. It's all of us. The mural wasn't perfect. Brush strokes were uneven, colors bled, but it was alive. A living symbol. Truth has roots, Ava said, repeating the phrase she'd once written. And now we've planted something that can't be cut down. The teens smiled, proud. Behind her, Lena approached quietly. No words passed between them, just shared pride, shared purpose. Ava placed her hand gently on the mural's painted trunk. The fight was never just hers. It had always been about everyone who'd been forced into silence. But not anymore. Ava returned to her apartment that night, the journal tucked under her arm. It had once been a weight, but now it felt like legacy. She lit a single candle and sat by the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but here, inside, there was peace. She opened the journal to the last page and wrote, "You were right, Mom. Truth outlives fear." She closed it gently and placed it in a box along with her own writings, press clippings, and the photo of her as a baby in Maya's arms. This wasn't the end of her story, but it was the closing of a chapter. A full circle. She sat back, breathing evenly. The candle flickered, casting soft shadows. Her life was no longer a question unanswered. It was a voice remembered, a name reclaimed. Ava Khatri, no longer lost, just beginning. Morning light streamed across Ava's face as she stepped outside. No headlines, no whispers, just wind rustling trees and footsteps on pavement. She walked with quiet certainty, coat fluttering behind her. At the bus stop, she stood beside everyday people, students, workers, strangers. No one knew who she was. And that was okay. She wasn't looking to be seen anymore. She had seen herself. A small girl walked by holding her father's hand. Ava smiled as the child stared back curiously, then grinned. In that fleeting exchange, something passed. Hope, recognition, resilience. The bus arrived, and Ava stepped on, finding a window seat. She pressed her hand to the glass. Her reflection stared back, not the Ava who was fired, silenced, or betrayed, but the Ava who walked through fire and kept walking. The story wasn't over. It was hers now. Every step, her own.